Dun, 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 dun. Well, this is my most terrifying review, only because I don't want to get anything wrong. The Thomas fanbase is a very strong one, and I want to do my best to respect the franchise, even though I know next to nothing about the tank engine himself, besides seeing a few episodes as a kid. However, I have no problem watching his feature-length film debut, Thomas and the Magic Railroad, because if Big Bird and Barney can have their own big-screen adventure, why can't Thomas and Friends? Well, I'm going to do my best to dig into the island of Sodor. All aboard! Thomas the Tank Engine originates from Reverend Wilbur Awdry's books, the Railway series, which started in 1945. The series was then adapted for television in 1984, featuring very basic sets, designs, and facial expressions. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends began airing on ITV in the United Kingdom, and still exists today, even with different name changes and upgraded animation styles. I was under the impression that Thomas and Friends always existed in the United States, only to discover that Thomas originally made his US debut through a repackaged series titled Shining Time Station, which contained new segments from the original UK narrator Ringo Starr, yes, that Ringo Starr, now playing the role of Mr. Conductor, who works at Shining Time Station on the Indian Valley Railroad. He was later replaced by, of all people, George Carlin. I don't think I'll ever get over the image of George Carlin getting airtime on PBS Kids. Mr. Conductor tells stories from Thomas and Friends, which is how the original episodes are mixed with the new US material. Eventually, this concept would end in 1993 with a few extra specials made later on, and while the show continued to be aired in some form or another on other stations, it would find its way back to PBS Kids in 2004, but with the Shining Time Station gone, and the show retaining its UK format, as Thomas and Friends. I only feel the need to explain this because in 2004, I would have been a kid. I was the type of kid who was too old for getting into Thomas and Friends, but anytime I did see it, I understood the premise and the characters. And being a kid, I always thought the show was exactly the way I was seeing it in 2004. So imagine my shock when watching Thomas and the Magic Railroad, when suddenly I'm getting confused by the lore of Sodor and its relation to Shining Time. I thought this was frozen expressions and limited stop-motion animation done on a small scale. Why is Alec Baldwin here as a miniature conductor? Why is Peter Fonda giving his most dramatic performance of his career about his love for a locomotive that, of all things, doesn't have a typical Thomas-esque face? Why is Mara Wilson here when she clearly wants to be done with acting altogether? For something with magic in the title, the real-world setting and the limited appearances of the trains really helps to make this feel more like Thomas and the pretty unsubstantial railroad. I went into this knowing it was going to be aimed at a younger audience, but there's plenty of other projects like this that can be entertaining amongst all demographics. Something like Follow That Bird was critically acclaimed, so I didn't assume this would be a boring screening. Movies like this can work. I couldn't help but feel this was a lackluster adaptation. Knowing that it actually has more to do with the US Shining Time Station, things are starting to connect a little more, and it makes sense how they landed those big names, given the appearances of bigger names on the original show. It still doesn't make sense though, since the TV show itself had already ended years prior to the feature-length movie being released, and when the show did return, it was a replica of the original UK counterpart. So, I'm not sure what audience they were really going for here. Thomas should absolutely be the main star, and given that his popularity has gone on longer than his brief connection to Shining Time Station, it doesn't really make sense that the Thomas movie has very little of Thomas in it. In theory, this is a basic story, but you have to ignore a lot of exposition if you want to keep up with it. Mr. Conductor is played by Alec Baldwin. He travels between Shining Time Station, which is essentially a normal world but with a bunch of movie cliches filling up the spaces, and the island of Sodor, the land of the talking trains and Sir Topham Hatt, who's only briefly mentioned but doesn't appear. Also, the Thomas theme song is never played, it's only whistled. I guess technically at this point the American audience wouldn't recognize the theme song since it wasn't used in Shining Time Station. Meanwhile, in the real world, Peter Fonda is the grandfather of Lily, but he's heartbroken that his train, Lady, can no longer run, lacking the coal necessary to ride her through the magic railroad, which bridges the island of Sodor and Shining Time Station. Lady needs a special kind of coal, and it's only found after a rail car of coal gets accidentally bumped into the magic railroad entrance, which Thomas eventually finds by some kind of coincidence. Lady gets the newly magical coal and is able to ride off again. When this happens, she finally gets a face, a CGI face, just to give you a glance at things to come. Also, Mr. Conductor and his protege need more sparkle dust to travel between worlds, which is also only accessible through the Magic Railroad. You know, the Magic Railroad that apparently no one can navigate or find except Lady and Thomas for some reason. Also, there's an evil train named Diesel who keeps attempting to destroy the others, and since there's apparently no oversight on this railway system, he almost succeeds in murder several times. He's also a dork because a lot of his plans end up failing and causing his own demise, so he's not the most threatening villain. I know I'm missing something in the overall explanation of the Magic Railroad, but does it matter? Well, I don't need an explanation for everything, but if you're overwriting the narrative and adding way too many plot devices, maybe you should slow down and remember, it's Thomas. In a sense, a lot of the contrivances can be ignored for the sake of having a good time, but nevertheless, this moves at a sluggish pace with not much to offer. For how the television show looked, this is a well-done recreation of the production design, but done on a bigger scale. I enjoy the practical effects. It's just too bad that so much of this movie falls apart. The story is way too muddled to realistically follow along, and even if you trim it down, it becomes almost too basic to have any kind of momentum. The characters don't have much to give, and while I know Alec Baldwin and especially Peter Fonda are giving it their all, I don't feel much of a connection to their circumstance. It's also a bit confused at the kind of movie it's trying to be. It has an opening song number, and honestly, while I actually kind of find it pleasing, there's not another song, so it's not a musical. At one point, Alec Baldwin addresses the audience like it's Dora the Explorer, but it only leads to one scenario where he needs to be saved, and it happens like an hour later, so it's not interactive either, except for this one instance. I also believe that the best parts of this movie were the Thomas bits, and while I understand this was aimed at the American audience who grew up with Shining Time Station, I wish the producers would have banked on the fact that Thomas and friends would have the bigger pull, so the story could be focused on them. In the end, it doesn't even feel like Thomas is one of the main characters, and everything that's substituted for his lack of appearances is not grand in a cinematic sense. I know this had a bigger budget, but this probably should have been a television special. It's a movie that's aimed at children, but remains in the hearts of the most loyal Thomas fans, even if they would admit it's a bit of a disappointment. I started this review out having no knowledge of Shining Time Station, but now that I know it exists, I can see why the American Thomas fanbase has such a love and appreciation for this 2000 film. I also read some of the reviews, and people admit that it could have been better, and comparing it to the original show, it sounds like Shining Time Station, and even Thomas and Friends, has some very memorable and valuable stories. From what I've heard, they're working on a new Thomas feature film, and honestly, I'm kind of optimistic. I think they could make something really worthwhile out of Thomas and Friends. Until then, fans of Thomas will be returning to the 2000 film as a somewhat guilty pleasure. And I understand why. I'm just looking forward to them doing something different, because I think you actually could do something with the Thomas and Friends and the island of Sodor, especially on a bigger scale. Special thanks to Spencer for this Patreon request. Thanks for watching the video, and special shout out to Anthony, Anna, Kirsten, Spencer, Lucas, Ryan, and Robert for the support on Patreon. By joining my Patreon, you can get exclusive videos and blogs, and for only $7, you can request your own movie review. I hope you stick around, cinephile, and have a happy, productive day.